Welcome to our PBL Movement online community live. We go live every second and fourth Sunday with a topic that you all want to talk about. So if there's something that you want me to go live about, you want to have one of our facilitators or trainers goes live about, just put it into the community. What are the things that you are working through right now? And we'll talk about it. And you can jump into this live as well, and you can ask your questions, get your individualized questions answered. That's the whole idea of this community, is to serve you, the members of the community. So today we're going to talk about public presentations and how you as a facilitator can best handle those. Like, what are some of the best practices? What are some things to watch out for if you're new? Even though we all know that you're going to have some bumps in the road, and what you really want to do is get started so that you can reflect and get better the next time, right? And there's a lot of different ways to do public presentations. We'll talk about some of those. We did that in some of the other lives too. We talked about end products, and we have a presentation, a whole set of resources around end products. Today's more around some best practices around end products. Before we jump into that though, have you checked out Life's a Project by Andrew Larson? It's a brand new PBL book. It's out. It's got reviews. People love it. There's a book study that goes along with it. You need to go get a copy today. If you go to pblpress.com, pblpress.com, you can go to you can go see all the books that we have at Magnify Learning. And Life's a Project is going to be right there. You're going to want to go to Amazon. You're going to want to get a copy. The same place on pblpress.com, right underneath the buy button is a book study button, which will lead you and or a team through discussion questions together so that you can have a great conversation around what does it mean to bring the 6 A's into my PBL classroom. When you look at the 6 A's, this is when you really start looking at your PBL practice in a different manner. You've gone through kind of the nuts and bolts. Maybe you've done a year of this, or I don't know, I suppose maybe you're freaked out and you want to make sure you're doing it right. However you're doing it, the 6 A's lets you get a little bit deeper, I think, right? So what Andrew does is he goes through each of the 6 A's and gives you a real life story from his life, but also from the classroom. So you get all of his PBL wisdom just downloaded right to you, so that, again, just like we're doing today, we want to kind of fast forward your PBL journey so that you miss a few of the pitfalls, right? Like, we know that you're going to fail in spots and that you're going to learn, but I'm pretty sure it's okay if you skip a couple of those, right? Like, you don't have to get every black eye that we've gotten. You can skip a couple of those stub toes by listening to some of our forerunners in the PBL world. And a book is a great way to do that. So you get a decade worth of PBL experience in like 2 to 3 hours of reading, right? Like, there's nothing better. It's like a time warp almost, because you're suddenly you download all of this knowledge and all these different ideas so quickly. You don't have to take a decade to learn them. So go to pblpress.com, get yourself a copy of Life's a Project. And then here's a bit of a teaser. You can get the ebook, you can get the paperback, you can get the hardback. And what's the next thing you're going to ask for? You're going to say, well, what about the audio version? Like, we're working on it right now, right? So we're working on getting the audio version out. And as soon as it is, we will let you know how you can grab that. So go grab Life's a Project, and then let's jump into public presentations. I think it's a cornerstone of project-based learning. There are a lot of things that go into project-based learning. You've got entry events, need to knows, you're building inquiry. You've got learners working together, so you have collaboration, you've got critical thinking. They're doing more than just regurgitating facts from your standards. But there's something that happens when you do a public presentation. There's something that happens when you go from, internalizing information, solving problems, and maybe you're going to write it down. That's super positive, right? But we've all been to a place where, like, we think we know the answer, and then we go to, like, verbalize it, and we can't quite put together the coherent thought that sounds so awesome in our brain, right? And that's what a public presentation does for our learners. If you would have gone to one of my classrooms when I was teaching 8th grade, and I say, hey, how many of you know compound sentences? Like, almost every hand would go up, right? Maybe a finger because they're 8th grade, and, okay, right? But everybody says, yep, I know compound sentences. So what does that mean, that they know compound sentences? For some of them, it means that they remember hearing the word, right, in 6th grade when they were first presented, right? Compound sentence, yeah, somebody said something about compound sentences. Some people could identify them, be like, yep, there's a comma and there's a conjunction. and I think that's compound sentence. Some people might know that there's an independent clause on either side of that conjunction. Some people can use them fluently, right? And some people could use complex sentences. And some of my learners could probably use compound complex sentences, right? They probably know it better than I do. But that's a whole continuum of, yes, Mr. Stoyer, I know compound sentences. Well, if you bring a public presentation into the mix, now you're going to find out really quick what it means when they say, I know compound sentences. Like, right? Because that's the next thing you say is, okay, well, why don't you give me one? Ooh, I don't know. I thought I could just point at one, right? And you start to find different levels. And so there's really some intense learning that happens, and reflection, I think, happens as you're bringing your learners to public presentations. So the other thing I love about public presentations is kind of globally, we're not to those best practices yet, but globally, and it's the same thing we do in our workshops, is as soon as you start the unit, you let everybody know there's going to be a public presentation of this work. So everything that's happening in between is getting you ready for the public presentation from day one, right? And I'll tell you, it works for adults and it works for kids. Like, you mean I'm going to have to show other people the things that I'm learning? Yes. Well, then I should probably be engaged, correct? And I think I'm going to ask questions. That's right. You're actually going to learn. It's going to be great. And I think the public presentation just kind of kickstarts things right off the bat. And that's why we can go to some PBL schools, some of our PBL model schools. Some amazing things are happening because the learners always know that things are going to be public and transparent. And the adults do too, right? So the facilitators know as well. So we've all got to be on our game. So public presentations, cornerstone of PBL. What are some best practices? So we'll put it into 3 different buckets. The first bucket is, how do you manage the public presentations? So how do you manage them? Like, because you're going to have community partners coming in, you're going to have your learners coming in. There's very different expectations of things, right? So when somebody from the Rotary Club comes in and they're going to be part of your authentic audience, they took the time off, they want to give back, they're here. Okay, now what? Right? They didn't even come with a pen. Like, they're not sure what to do. It might be their first time. So do you have some kind of an agreement, some kind of a conversation that you have with that community partner so they know what their role is? Their role is not to pick apart the presentation and make people feel awful, which doesn't usually happen. Technically, I've only seen it happen one time, actually. It was a lawyer that felt like that was her job. And I think she was probably trying to help, but it wasn't working. Most come in and have real soft gloves. So if you want them to be a little tougher, you're going to have to let them know. Do you want them to be talking about content? Like, are they there to judge content? Not typically. That's usually your job. So I like the idea of, like, hey, you're going to come in and give likes and wonders, right? Give some likes, give some wonders, push some thinking, right? Be that outside audience. But what kind of agreements do you have set up? Maybe they're written, maybe they're verbal, but some kind of a conversation that lets the community partner side know what their job is. Same thing with your learners. Like, what's their job? Their job is to have practiced, right? You've given them a practice presentation, so they're going to do that. Right? That's mandatory. But they've also fixed those things from the practice presentation, right? They've revised and they've gotten better. So now they're going to interact with community partners in an intelligent and respectful way. Right? So talking through those agreements, building the agreements with your learners is super helpful, so we're all on the same page. Some other things you might want to consider is this idea of what are some possible disruptions that can happen during a presentation? There's lots of them, right? And I don't know that we can list them all, but you'll start to be aware of them. So a couple you might want to be ready for is the group that's fully not prepared, right? That just gives up halfway through. They're like, I got nothing. It's like, whoa, hold on. You're not allowed to do that, right? But it could happen. So what are you going to do? Okay, great. Can I ask you a couple of questions? Right. And this is actually from Andrew's book, In Life's a Project. He's got a set of questions in there that if you have a group that's just totally unprepared, then they kind of know that you have a set of questions that you're going to guide them through right there live, right? So they know that they're not just getting off the hook by saying, no, I didn't do it. You don't just get to leave, right? You're still going to have questions that you ask. There's other disruptions. You might think through, like, is there a pep rally or those kind of different things that might mess up a schedule? When is lunch coming? Are there some of your learners, maybe they leave to go, do advanced algebra or some piece like that. So think through those disruptions when you're making the schedule. So just by that being a bullet point, because there's no way that I can anticipate all of your disruptions, right? But if you just have that as a bullet point of what are some possible disruptions for today, then you're aware of them and you're not surprised. Because if you've got, 50 presentations set up for today and everybody's just rotating through, and then you've got a glitch in there, right? That really messes things up and it puts a huge lurch into the machine. So think through the disruptions. The other one here in managing the public presentations is just the possible barriers. Right? The same thing, just make it a bullet point. What are some barriers that your learners might have? If it's your very first presentation of the year, you might have some new learners that are not used to PBL, they're not used to presenting. So they might need some additional helps to get ready, right? So that's a possible barrier for them. Depending on, and we'll get to this in a second, like how you're going to build out your showcases is an expo format, which is usually kind of pretty informal, versus, kind of a panel, right? So you've got, 4 community partners up there, and it feels a little more intimidating, right? So you can have some barriers there that you might want to think through, both in time of year, but what are some other possible barriers? Do you have language barriers, or other things like that? So those are kind of the 3 bullet points for managing public presentations. You've got set up agreements, both for community partners and learners. Think about disruptions and think about barriers. And I think just making those bullet points is going to help you think through that. Think through it with your facilitators that are along with you and just ask them, like, hey, I plan on having this on April 13th. I'm going to have this expo. Can you think of any disruptions? Well, that's like the whole school convocation. That's a really bad idea, right? Remember, in the morning, we've got that announcement and that's not going to work. Oh, whew, thank you. That's so great. April 14th, beautiful, right? And so just think through those bullet points. Next big bucket is going to be showcases. How are you going to bring about this public presentation? I'm going to give you, there's a lot of different ways you can do this, but let's give you 3. You can do a gallery walk. So a gallery walk is more of a protocol, right? This is not the super informal expo that we'll get to here in just a second. A gallery walk is more formal. You're going to have community partners go from group to group. They're going to be there for 3 minutes. They're going to give feedback for 2 minutes, and then they're going to move to the next group. And everybody knows that, right? Learners know that. Community partners know that. You probably, before you start your whole circus in motion, you're going to explain that to everybody. And somewhere up on a screen, somewhere you have the schedule there, right? 3 minutes of presentation, 1 minute of likes, 1 minute of wonders, boom, and you go. Right? So you've got that gallery walk, a little bit more of a formalized showcase. So this might be one that, maybe it's early in the year where your learners are not ready for the informal. They haven't done enough of these. Depends on PBL experience, of course. But that might be one way to do that. The second one is a ghost walk. This is one I actually had no idea about. Kendra McPeters put this in the community, and I was like, that's interesting. A ghost walk is one where the end product that your learners have created is going to stand on its own. So the ghost portion, right, is that they're not there. They might be interacting with community partners, but when community partners go from end product to end product, the end product needs to stand on its own, which is a really interesting twist, I think, because yes, the end product is sitting there, but now is there a video that goes along with it? Is there, a set of bullet points? Is there a set of pictures or diagrams that explain things? How are they going to explain their end product without being there? And that's, again, takes a whole nother set of critical thinking skills, I think, right? If you're there, the learners that can talk through anything, right? Can talk themselves out of anything. And so they don't have to fully prepare sometimes because they know that they can talk. But what if it's a ghost gallery walk and now, they don't get to be there? It's like, ooh, they have to tighten things up a little bit. So I like that idea. The expo is one that people go to often. It's a little more informal. Everybody's got tables in the multi-purpose room, and their group of 3 to 4 is standing next to them. Community partners come up, they engage in conversation. They've probably got a 2-minute spiel that they give, and then they start doing questions. Hopefully they get into informal questions really quick, and they're starting to talk about the real issues that they have to talk about with that community partner. Say, and this might be a key point or best practice, is that your learners have the ability to ask follow-up questions, right? So if a community partner makes a point, they might answer that question, but then say, hey, community partner, could you go a little bit deeper with that question? Like, where are you trying to get that from? But helping them interact with the community partners, I think, is one of the big skills we want our learners to walk away from. And the expo sometimes, I think, is a missed opportunity for that, because our learners just talk about, their trifold or their end product or whatever they have. And again, important things are being communicated through those end products, but can they also learn how to do a little bit of back and forth and not just talk and then have the community partner move on and say, well, that was pretty good. But where can you create some real interaction? So you've got the idea of big buckets, managing public presentations, showcases, and then how about just some alternatives to public presentations? Like, what are some things that you can do that are not learners standing behind a podium, that, they're not maybe the expo piece that happens often. And again, it's not bad, because you really want to mix it up. You don't want your learners to get too used to one specific area, or they're going to get kind of pigeonholed there. And we want them to be able to be successful with community partners in multiple different arenas. So what if they had a video that they sent? And this is one that I love for long distance community partners, because now we've got Zoom as a household name and everybody can use that. You've got Google Drive that you can use. So you can send a video to somebody on a different coast than you. They can give feedback via Google Doc, and then your learners can give follow-up questions in that same Google Doc. So that one video presentation that they do, it's almost a combination of that ghost walk too, right? Because the video that they send needs to be able to stand on its own, right? Here's the driving question, here's the problem that we're solving, here's the steps that we've taken, here's our conclusion, right? And then some way for your community partner to dive back in. So they could do a video, you could do a performance. Andrew talks about in Life's a Project, the dystopian masterpiece, where his learners actually get to go to the theater that's close to their school and they actually perform the play that they create. How cool is that, right? Like, that is, in some ways, it's way beyond cool, because now they're up on stage literally doing a performance in a place where people do performances, right? So they're absolutely in the shoes of performers doing what performers do. So finding some way to do a performance as their end product can be really powerful as well, because there's a lot of preparation that comes into that. There's a lot of practice that goes into something like that. And again, we're looking for ways to handle our standards a little bit differently, so that our learners can process and think critically in different ways and problem solve because they're in different situations. Another way is you could host community partners. So can you host an event? Maybe there's a nonprofit that is, raising money or awareness, or maybe you have multiple nonprofits that come in and your learners are hosting this event for the public. That's really cool. So now you've got the public coming in and your learners are in charge of all kinds of little small logistics is what you want to put them in. And here you might have different committees that are set up. You've got a welcoming committee. You've got a logistics committee. You've got a trash committee. You've got a keep the crowd moving committee, right? All these little things that we as adults do in the real world. Like, if you've ever held any kind of event, you know that there's 6,000 details that nobody knows about, right? Hopefully it all goes well and nobody knows about all the different things that you had to do to pull that event off. I think when we let our learners in on that, when they're hosting, it opens their eyes. It opens their eyes to this idea of, what does it mean to truly host? Like, you're bringing people in and now it's your job to take care of them. Well, that's a leadership skill, right? That's a huge leadership skill. So not to mention, the content that people will be engaging in, and that your learners can now be experts in some form. Say that they're a tour guide, right? They meet someone at the door from the public and they're going to come in and this person doesn't fully know what's going to happen on the other side of that door. So now your learner needs to, engage them, right? Hello, how are you doing? Right? And then needs to inform them quickly and clearly in what the process is. And as they do that, at some point, you take your learners and you step back and say, look, it's working because you all did a fantastic job. These nonprofits are communicating the work that they do to a brand new audience, and more great work is going to happen because you all did a fantastic job. Isn't that awesome? That's so awesome. So there are a lot of different ways that you can take public presentations. If you're just don't get stuck in one, right? Don't get stuck behind the podium. Don't get stuck in an expo. Don't get stuck in the museum. And all of those have a place, right? They all have a place somewhere. In even the authenticity that we really strive for at Magnify Learning. And we want to start people in authentic PBLs, I think, because otherwise they can get stuck in non-authentic PBLs. Like, you need to know where scenario projects fit. So like the mock trial, for instance, is one that Andrew again mentions in Life's a Project. You should go grab that. Go to pblpress.com, grab Life's a Project by Andrew Larson. And they talk about the mock trial that they do. But there's real lawyers, there's real judges, right? There's a real summons that goes out. But we know the trial is not real. Now, are your learners ever really going to be able to be a part of a real trial where they are the lawyers arguing for one side? No, not really, right? Like that doesn't happen, right? Like lawyers go to school for a real long time. So, but how does a learner get to figure out if they like something like that or don't like it, right? A mock trial fits that. So it's a mock trial. It's not real. It's not super authentic, but there are a lot of authentic pieces that fit, and your learners get to think critically and differently and experience something different. So it has a place. So as you're thinking about public presentations, think through the idea of what's the place, like what's the purpose of doing the presentations this particular way, this particular time. And if it's your first time, maybe the purpose is you're doing it to see how it goes, right? So you have 4 community partners, you're going to put them in a room, you're going to run all your learners through there, and they're all going to present. And you're going to learn something from that. Don't get stuck in that though, right? Like, what's the best way for this next PBL unit? What's the best way for that public presentation? And as you think about those things critically and you think through some of these big buckets, how are you going to manage the public presentations? How will you do showcases? And then keep it fresh, have the alternatives, right? That's that third bucket, is have alternatives as you're moving through, because your learners are going to, there's new wrinkles in the brain, right? As they start doing different things, and you might not notice them. Some of those will not be standards, right? When you move from an expo to a ghost walk to hosting, like there's no standard that tells you need to do that, but there's definitely different wrinkles happening in the brain as they're experiencing new ways to interact with community partners. And that's powerful. That is powerful. So that's our talk on public presentations. If you have follow-up questions, put them in the comments or just reach out. You can DM, of course, or put it in the community, wherever you want to put it, and we'll keep the conversation going. We've got a whole host of resources around public presentations, whether it's end products. If you're getting ready to do your first one or you're planning for next year, reach out and say, hey, I've been doing expos, but what are some other ways I could do this? And if you would, just attach your driving question to that question, right? So yeah, I'm looking for something besides an expo. Here's my driving question. And that lets us just kind of tag in and, give you some different suggestions that you can take or leave, right? That's the beauty of the community, is we're just giving you a bunch of ideas and you can find ones that really work for you, and maybe they don't, right? And that's fine too. So we want you to find your sweet spot in your PBL classroom. That's where we really want you to be, because then you're going to be at your strongest and your learners are going to be super empowered when that happens. So thank you for tuning in today, and go lead inspired.